minute before we start today's presentation. You must be able to have a set of slides in front of you that will advance automatically as the webinar progresses. If you are not able to access the slides through the Zoom platform, you can also check your email as we just sent the slides in PDF format. And hopefully all of you can hear me okay. I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here in that I'm not able to see the chat function as I'm walking through the slides, but I'll rely on my colleagues, Angel and Omar, who I believe are signed on to help me with that. So I think we can get started. And so today's presentation is really an orientation to pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV, specifically among gay and bisexual men and transgender people. And this is a pre-workshop review that MPact has organized in preparation for the in-person workshop that we will conduct in Johannesburg in a couple of weeks. Okay, I'm trying to move to the next slide here. Okay, there we go. So in terms of today's agenda, what we have planned is, okay, somebody texted me saying that they can see the slides, but they cannot hear anything. If that's not true for everybody, it's probably a problem that's specific to you. And so I would just try to use your computer audio settings to see if that helps. Okay, so today's overview is really around going through the agenda for the workshop in Johannesburg. And then the bulk of the presentation today will be to talk about pre-exposure prophylaxis. And we're calling it PrEP 101 as a way to talk about PrEP basics, but it's one and the same thing, PrEP basics or PrEP 101. So in terms of the agenda, I have with me on this call my team members who I'll introduce shortly, right after we get through the agenda. But part of what we wanted to do for the PrEP workshop in Johannesburg was to really provide a foundation for some of the frameworks that are important when we're talking about pre-exposure prophylaxis. And as you can see on the slide here, they have to do with sex positivity, community empowerment, combination prevention, comprehensive sexual health, and normative guidelines, basically clinical guidelines for the use of PrEP. And we at MPact and ITPC really believe that this foundation is really quite important because PrEP is not just a pill, it's not a silver bullet, and it's really meant to be viewed in the context and also implemented in the context of community empowerment. It's one more option in the prevention suite, and it's really one among the different options that are available for comprehensive sexual health. And so that's those foundations are really quite important when we talk about PrEP. We'll spend the first day also speaking about the PrEP basics, the facts and myths, and we'll also give you an opportunity to talk about some of the contextual barriers and facilitators that are present in your country when we're talking about PrEP. On day two, we will move away from the foundation and we'll really talk about the what, which is basically what are the building blocks of PrEP. So by PrEP startup, we really mean rolling up PrEP in your country for the very first time, having a pilot project or a demonstration project. And then there's also PrEP rollout and scale up, which is once you have PrEP startup, then you have PrEP delivery and then scaling up of PrEP. And so we really think about this as the PrEP life cycle in terms of startup, rollout, and scale up. And we've developed several case studies that are going to help us to walk through some of the basic concepts and principles involved in PrEP programming. And so on day two, we'll have a series of case studies that primarily and principally link to starting PrEP in your country. And then we'll have a set of case studies that link to delivering and scaling up PrEP in your country. Um, we are likely to have a session on PrEP pricing that will be done by ITPC. And we anticipate that this session will actually be done um, through Zoom while we're in Johannesburg. And so we're working out the finer details in terms of timing for that session. But that session is really meant to give us an overview of patents and pricing and how advocacy for pricing has worked in the treatment context and why it's important in the PrEP context. And we're going to have a specific focus on the African countries represented in the room. On day three, we have a number of tracks, and this is day three is really the how. I spoke about day two being the what. Day three will be the how, and what we're hoping to achieve on day three is to really think about the various approaches and strategies we need to be using and deploying in the context of PrEP rollout and PrEP demand mobilization. And we've created a number of different tracks. And our goal is to ensure that all of these approaches get discussed in the workshop, and that depending on where you gravitate the most, we're gonna help you gain some approaches from your peers as well as from the expertise in the room around those approaches. We had a training in Cambodia recently for countries in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Caribbean. And we learned that, for example, a lot of you were interested in developing a social marketing campaign. So as a result, we're likely to offer track one for everybody, and then probably have a way for you to select into tracks 2 through 6, depending on what is most appealing and relevant to you in your country context. So the day four will be really taking the idea to action, where each participant develops an idea or an action plan and receives feedback. And this is arguably the most important part of the training. It's the last day, and we really, expect each candidate or each participant to come up with an action plan, and there'll be substantial time for you to get feedback on that action plan. And I'm sure you'll have a ton of questions about this part of the workshop and the agenda, but you're going to have to sit tight till we get to Johannesburg, where days 1, 2, and 3 will logically kind of lead you to developing an action plan on day 4, and there'll be more instructions that are provided to you on the first day during the workshop. And so that's basically a quick and dirty overview of the 4 days. And I I think that in the interest of time, we will move forward and not stop for questions. And I appreciate that some of you are working through your audio challenges and technical challenges. And so without further ado, I will move on at this point. And I want to, stop here to just introduce the team from MPact. Who will be actually present in Johannesburg. I'll be there myself, Mohan, as I introduce myself. Omar Banyos is our senior technical advisor. Omar is really the principal, agent for the training facilitation at the Johannesburg training. And Omar will be leading several aspects of the training and facilitating the training, and also guiding the other facilitators in the process of agenda development and training design. And Omar is joined by Angel Fabian, who is a medical doctor by training and an advocacy coordinator at MPact. We'll also have Greg Tataglion, senior communications officer, who is an expert on social marketing campaigns. We're going to also have the pleasure and privilege of working with Dr. Bactrin Kilingo, who's a senior consultant for ITPC, who has a lot of years of experience in treatment advocacy, education, and campaigning as well in the treatment context. We'll also be joined by Helen Etial, her program coordinator for ITPC, based in Botswana, and Batrin, of course, is based in Kenya. And we will not be joined in person, but Charlie Baran, a senior consultant for MPact, was the primary author for the case studies that you will all, be presented with and asked to review for day 2 of the workshop. Okay, so I think we're going to now move into sort of the presentation itself in terms of PrEP and the PrEP basics. And before we start really defining PrEP, I wanted to encourage the group to think about the day-to-day experience of an LGBTI member in your community and think about what does their daily life look like. Think about what does their sexual life look like and what does their sexual health look like. As you think about this individual, the odds are against, our community in that there's a higher incidence of sexually transmitted infections globally in nearly every country that consistently and truthfully reports this data. Gay men, as you all know, are 24 times more likely to be living with HIV in any given context in the global north or south. Transgender women, it's much worse, where they're 49 times more likely to be living with HIV. So I think without going into a lot of details about the epidemiology and acknowledging the fact that you all are very familiar with the data in your own country, I think we can safely say that HIV is still a rising epidemic among gay men and transgender people. Globally, new infections among key populations account for 45% of all new HIV infections. And this figure is likely to be underestimated given the stigma around disclosing and reporting, behavior and identities linked to key populations, namely gay men, people who use drugs, sex workers, and transgender people. As much as that was sobering in terms of the rising HIV epidemic and that we've really been through the epidemic for decades now, and this is the 4th decade, it's also clear that we've accrued a lot of expertise and knowledge and understanding of the epidemic. One of the main kind of things we've learned about the epidemic is that HIV does not affect everybody the same way, and it certainly presents a disproportionate burden on gay men and transgender people. This particular figure is really quite important. It's the HIV prevention, care, and treatment cascade. I suspect that most of you are familiar with this, and if you are not, I would definitely look this up online. And basically, what this chart here presents is the cascade of care ranging from prevention all the way down to treatment. What I don't like about this chart is that it puts us in boxes. It has the negative on one side, it has people who are living with HIV and who are positive on one side, and it really kind of puts us in these boxes, which I don't like. But what I like about this is that it really helps us understand where some of the issues are when we are trying to deliver prevention or treatment services to our communities. And on the left side, you'll see that you're meant to capture a number of people from your community living with HIV, and on towards the right, we intend to initiate them on ART and to sustain them on ART and to suppress their viral load. But we all know that as we go through the cascade, that people drop off the continuum, and this happens for different reasons. It's different in different contexts. It's different for different individuals. But the conclusion is that people keep dropping off the cascade for different reasons. There's also universal acknowledgement and understanding that, as you'll see at the top and the bottom, human rights, supportive laws, zero tolerance for violence, community mobilization and engagement are factors that really help prevent leaks from this cascade. So when interventions are grounded in human rights, when there's community mobilization and engagement as part of a package of services for prevention or treatment, you're less likely to see people drop off the cascade. There's two things here that are really quite important for us in the context of PrEP. One is we have understood the dynamics of a cascade in different contexts, in different countries, in the treatment setting. It can be directly applied to PrEP as well, because people also start PrEP and then they drop off. There's lack of adherence, there's lack of follow up to PrEP. People don't come back for their lab investigations, and they basically stop taking PrEP. And so we can understand leaky cascades in PrEP by understanding treatment cascade. And secondly, I think it's important here to also point out that community mobilization and engagement at the bottom is really quite important if we want to keep people retained in care. And similarly, there is no PrEP program without community empowerment. And so those are the two principal takeaways from this chart in particular. So this next chart is taken from the MISMIT, the MSM Implementation Toolkit, which, as most of you will know, is a UN guidance for implementing programs and services for gay and bisexual men. And this chart is a representation of the key elements of community empowerment. And all these different circles around community empowerment talk about the different ways in which um, programs must be run in order for there uh, to be agency within communities to make decisions about their own health, in this case sexual health. But they don't necessarily mean that they all have to be present or they have to work in a certain order. But these are some of the key elements of community empowerment, which we know are really quite important in the delivery of services. And here again, the reason why we have the slide here is to reinforce and reiterate the fact that PrEP will not work in isolation. It needs to be grounded in principles of community empowerment for it to be successful. Here's another reminder that sexual health is also, is beyond HIV, but it's also um, um, a good reminder that gay men and trans women and trans people um, present with various needs in the context of their sexual health, and it's not always just HIV, and sometimes it's never HIV. It could be other issues. And one of the most common, sexual health issues outside of HIV is STIs. But we also have other dimensions to sexual health. And this is just a simple reminder that sexual health is beyond HIV, and that LGBTI people present with a number of health issues linked to their sexuality and sexual lives. I also want to just present a couple of principles before we talk about, really what is PrEP, and this one's really important, which is the imperative to reduce new sexually transmitted infections, including HIV, should not impinge on personal freedoms. And what this really means is that as we think about PrEP as a scientific breakthrough, and as we think about guidance that accompanies, guidance around PrEP, um, our responsibility is really in understanding the facts about PrEP and communicating those facts to community. But it's not our responsibility to impinge on people's personal freedoms in terms of how they choose to do what prevention options they choose to avail, and how they choose to live their sexual lives. And I think that's really quite important as we think about PrEP, because one of the common um, statements that people make when they make them about PrEP is about PrEP and the use of condoms, for example. And so I think we want to be mindful of how we talk about these issues and how we frame these issues. And so, and this is not just applicable to PrEP, this is applicable to really all prevention interventions, that we keep in mind that personal freedom should be privileged when we're trying to, um, instigate public health approaches in the community. The second principle that I want to leave behind is that primary prevention should be thought of as a network of community-led strategies combined as opposed to standalone interventions that are imposed. This again is just reinforcing what I said earlier, which is that there is no silver bullet, and PrEP isn't a silver bullet. And primary prevention should be thought of as a network of strategies rather than one prevention intervention that can solve everything. As much as it's true that for some people, they might just need one prevention intervention for their life at a given certain time, at a given point in time. But I think PrEP is an exciting addition to the suite of combination prevention options available for gay men and transgender people. Okay, I'm having some trouble advancing these slides. Give me a second.
Everyone who just joined in. Yes.
Okay, so finally, the moment of truth is here, which is what is PrEP. So sorry about the tech glitches there. The first few slides here really talked about the basic principles, and just to reinforce them, I think we talked about HIV still being a problem, but then people really present with a diverse range of issues related to their sexual health and their general health, and that it's important for us to think about PrEP in the context of comprehensive sexual health, and also think about PrEP in the context of combination prevention. We also talked about personal freedom, which for me touches upon the issue of sex positivity. And we also talked about the importance of community empowerment in the rollout of PrEP. So now, we really get into the meat of the webinar, which is what is PrEP. So PrEP practically means pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is before coming into contact with HIV, treatment to prevent an infection from happening. So pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, is an HIV prevention strategy where HIV-negative individuals take anti-HIV medications before coming into contact with HIV to reduce their risk of becoming infected. The medications work to prevent HIV from establishing infection inside the body. What is the difference between PrEP and PEP? So PEP, as you know, is post-exposure prophylaxis. So the key difference here is that PEP is an intervention that's given after coming into contact with HIV potentially. So post-exposure prophylaxis is where individuals take HIV medications after coming into contact with HIV to reduce their risk of becoming infected. We don't know if they've actually come into contact with HIV. It's really a potential exposure to HIV. And we also cannot always be sure if they are negative or positive because they had just been exposed to the HIV potentially. PEP is a month-long course of drugs and must be started within 72 hours after possible exposure. And as you know, PrEP, you take it on an ongoing basis. So those are the two primary differences between PrEP and PEP. To be more specific, pre-exposure prophylaxis is more effective than post-exposure prophylaxis. And this is important to understand in the context of PrEP and PEP, since PEP and PrEP are increasingly more available in countries. The reason here is because PrEP, the drug concentrations are already high in blood from an individual taking those doses in the preceding days or weeks. We also know that efficacy data is available, that it works in humans for PrEP, whereas in PEP, it's mostly animal studies that talk to efficacy. So how does PrEP work? PrEP works by blocking an enzyme called HIV reverse transcriptase. By blocking this enzyme, it prevents HIV from making more copies of itself in the body. So I think effectiveness of PrEP really talks about, how much protection does PrEP offer for HIV? For people who take it 7 times a week, which is every day, a pill every day, the level of protection is 99%. For those who take only 4 pills per week, the level of protection is very, very high. It's 96%. And for those who take only 2 pills per week, it's 76%, which is also, reasonably on the higher end. But I think here the takeaway is that when people were taking their pills in the IPREX trial, the very first trial that denoted efficacy of PrEP, they noticed that the individuals who took the drug 4 times a week and who missed the doses the other 3 days, their level of protection was still very, very high. A lot of you might have questions about side effects of PrEP. PrEP is actually a safe drug according to trials that have been conducted to date, and it it's quite safe to use in a number of communities and populations, but it does have some side effects. But the good news is that those side effects go away very quickly. One of the most common side effects reported is nausea. 9% of those who received Truvada during the IPREX trial reported nausea in the first month, compared with 5% of those who received placebo. But after the first month, this 9% went down to the same as the placebo data. Headache is the second most common side effect. Again, here, very low reporting level of headaches by participants who received Truvada, compared with 3.3% of those who received the placebo. Weight loss is the third most common side effect. Again, here, very few reporting weight loss, 2.2 in the experimental group and 1.1 in the placebo group. And last, small increases in serum creatinine, which is measured as a percentage. And here it's 0.3% increase of those who received Truvada experienced mild increases in serum creatinine that persisted until the next test. And for most people, these side effects went away on their own after the first few weeks of taking Truvada or when the medication was stopped. So with that background, I wanted to go into case examples. I am not sure how this will work because my chat function is not perfect. But I think, hopefully I'll try to, navigate both my chat and the slides. But if not, I might ask, Angel to unmute and help as needed. So these case examples, basically, it's to help us review the material that we covered just now. So here's one case example. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So the case example here is Simon cannot take his pills back home, but he can have them at work, where Simon takes the pills Monday to Friday. And we're obviously talking here about PrEP pills. And will 5 pills be adequate? 5 pills a week be adequate protection for HIV? And I was wondering if somebody could maybe type their answer on the chat to this question, to this case example.
So this is Angel.
Great. So I
Just
see that folks are saying yes, and
yes.
that's exactly correct. So 5 pills a week offers more than 96% percentage protection. So it's really quite it's enough adequate protection against HIV. So I appreciate the responses. Okay. Next case example: Jeff wants to take a break from sex. How many days should Jeff continue taking his PrEP after his last potential exposure? So Jeff is on PrEP, obviously, and he wants to take a break from sex. And the question here is, how many days should Jeff continue taking the PrEP after his last potential exposure, which is his last sexual experience? Does someone have an answer for this?
I have
7 days. Anyone else? 4 weeks. 4 weeks, 28 days. Anyone else?
7 days.
Yep, I think 28 days is going to be the winning answer, and this is primarily based off of our principles and for how we use PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis, and based on a number of studies, including animal studies, and how post-exposure prophylaxis and pre-exposure prophylaxis work by preventing replication of the HIV virus. It's been recommended that an individual takes PrEP for 4 weeks after the last exposure, if possible, and this will kind of align with the PrEP regimen as well, PEP regimen as well. So the answer is 4 weeks. Thank you. So here's another case example. Phil recently started taking feminizing hormone therapy. Phil is also interested in starting PrEP. Is PrEP even an option for Phil? So here we're really, presenting a case example where someone's taking feminizing hormone therapy and they are interested in starting PrEP. So the question is really asking about what we know about the interaction between PrEP and feminizing hormone therapy. Does anyone want to weigh in? So Brian's saying that PrEP is an option for trans persons. That's a great answer. So I think yes, we do know that PrEP is safe for use in individuals using feminizing hormones. Tenofovir, which is the principal ingredient in PrEP, the levels of the blood in the blood were reduced by 13%. In trans women who used estradiol but remained above the level shown to confer protection. And what that means is that even though the feminizing hormones can reduce the concentration of the drug in the blood, it's not enough to be clinically significant, which means that PrEP, it'll still work as PrEP. So PrEP is definitely a safe and effective option for someone taking feminizing hormone. Okay, so here's one more. Addie likes to drink alcohol on the weekends. Is it safe for them to mix PrEP with their drinks? Okay, so it looks like some of us feel like it's safe, and some of us feel like it's not safe. I think just to clarify, the question is really asking us to think about whether alcohol interferes with PrEP, and we know that the efficacy of PrEP does not change with intake of alcohol. And so, yes, the answer is yes, it is safe. And so alcohol intake does not lower PrEP efficacy. You might feel, sick from having too many drinks and taking PrEP, but that doesn't make PrEP any less effective. And so alcohol intake does not lower PrEP efficacy. So I believe we've come to the end of the case examples. Well, actually, we have one more. So this one is Seth heard about a new pill on WhatsApp that works like PrEP but does not contain tenofovir. Should Seth go for the new pill? So Seth has heard about this new pill that works like PrEP, but it doesn't contain tenofovir. And should Seth go for that pill? So sorry, I'm not able to read the chat responses. But I think most of you will get this right in that, right now, tenofovir is the principal ingredient in PrEP, and along with emtricitabine or FTC. And so you want the pre-exposure prophylaxis to have both these ingredients, and that's what's been proven as safe and efficacious for gay men through the IPREX trial. And we should also remember that Truvada is only the brand name in the US, and so there might be different brand names that are used elsewhere. But the ingredient of tenofovir is really quite important, in pre-exposure prophylaxis, and it's only the oral pill that's been approved. So you might have heard about injectables, about patches, about other kinds of modes of administration for PrEP, but those are all under trial. And right now, the only PrEP that's been approved for the use of in HIV prevention is the pill, which contains tenofovir and emtricitabine. Okay, so let me see if I can. Okay, well, I guess I can't really see the chat anymore. So I apologize for that because I don't know what's being said on the chat. But I wanted to very quickly spend some time going over some of the questions that we asked in the pre-workshop survey that concluded this morning, and then use that as a way for us to kind of check our knowledge on this. Okay. Okay. So the first question is: PrEP is equally effective as PEP. So is this true or false? And I'm going to try to bring my chat back here. Yes, so I can see that people are saying false. I think that in the pre-workshop survey itself, a number of you answered true on this one, and it's actually not correct. So PrEP is more effective than PEP, and therefore the statement is false that PrEP is equally as effective as PEP. And I think, as we just said, the reason why it's more effective than PEP is because you've already been taking the pill for a while, so the drug concentration in the blood is quite high. And we also know efficacy studies have been done in humans, and as a result, PrEP is more effective than PEP. Okay. So the next question is: for people who take 4 pills per week, the level of protection against HIV infection is 80%. True or false? Yes, that's correct. So the answer is false because the level of protection against HIV is 96% and not 80%. So that's really great that everybody got that correct. Okay, moving on. PrEP is more protective in men than women. This is false. There has been no distinction between the efficacy of PrEP between men and women as shown by the IPREX trial or any other trial that has investigated this. So oral PrEP is not necessarily more protective in men versus women. So this statement is false. For people who take 2 PrEP pills a week, the level of protection is 50%. True or false? Yeah, this is also false because we just learned that for people who take 2 PrEP pills a week, the level of protection is 76%. So this is about side effects with nausea. So 90% of those who received Truvada reported nausea in the first month, compared with 5% of those who received placebo. This is kind of meant to be a trick question because it says 90%, whereas the level of reported nausea was only 9%. So this is certainly false because only 9% reported nausea in the first month. And then after that, those symptoms went away. In one PrEP trial, only 0.3% of those who received Truvada experienced mild increases in serum creatinine that persisted until the next test. So most of you answered that you don't know, but hopefully at this point, it's very clear that among the 4 side effects we talked about, nausea was the most common, followed by headache, followed by weight loss, followed by a slight increase in serum creatinine, but only 0.3% of those who received Truvada experienced this in the next test. So here's one which we asked in the pre-workshop survey. Among people who inject drugs, PrEP reduces the risk of getting HIV by more than 70% when used consistently. We did not go over this content on today's webinar, but I will include a study on this done in Thailand in our resources, glossary we share with you. But PrEP does reduce the risk of getting HIV by more than 70% among people who inject drugs. And this was based on a trial that was done in Thailand a couple of years ago. So this statement is true. Most of you got this right, that the IPREX trial showed that PrEP reduces the risk of HIV infection among both gay and bisexual men as well as trans women. It did not exclude trans women. So we also know that there were a number of trans women, though a minority, were enrolled in the IPREX trial. I think this one, we all know that alcohol intake does not lower PrEP efficacy and therefore can be taken while taking PrEP. And then this one's just a repeat of the earlier question, which is basically that 4 pills per week is all you need to be protected in the context of anal sex, because you get 96% efficacy as a result of that. It's also been recommended by the WHO that PrEP is fully protective after 7 days of continuous use, regardless of the site of HIV exposure. So whether it's anal sex or vaginal sex or injection drug use, the WHO says that PrEP, you should take it 7 days before you can really realize its full efficacy. But that said, in a lot of different situations, people might not have the luxury of having a 7-day course of PrEP available before potential exposure. So this is the best case scenario, but it's not that If they don't take it for 7 days, it will not work at all, because in one scenario, PrEP can also be used as PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. So this one's also something we went through. Feminizing hormonal therapy reduces tenofovir levels in the blood, but if taken consistently, PrEP can still be effective in these individuals, which is true. Oral PrEP containing tenofovir is currently the only WHO recommended PrEP tool, and that is also true. This question, for people who take PrEP irregularly and do not acquire HIV, the possibility of having drug-resistant HIV is 0, low, moderate, high, or not sure. So this is a trick question. You should also remember that you get drug-resistant HIV if you have HIV, right? So, and if you do not acquire HIV, but you're only taking your pills irregularly, there's no risk of having drug-resistant HIV. So the possibility here is 0. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of the presentation, and it might be a safe time for me to open my chat window here. I am not sure that it makes sense for us to unmute everybody, but if you can type your questions on the group chat window, Omar, Angel, and I might be able to answer them. Yeah, do you guys have any questions about the content we covered today? And while you guys are thinking about that, I also wanted to just invite Omar and Angel and anyone else from MPact or ITPC in the room to add to what was discussed.
Yes, hello. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is Angel. Can everyone hear me? Okay, just wanted to reiterate, I know that there were some unsure answers in the chat when the question around creatine.
So we'll give a couple of minutes for questions, but hopefully this content was useful and clear. We thought that it was important for us to have this as a basis for us to be on the same page so that we can really move forward into more strategic thinking in Johannesburg. And so as a result, we want to do this webinar as a way to kind of prime folks and to bring everybody on the same page in terms of PrEP. Are there any sort of burning questions from the group about the content we covered today?
Mohan, if you could reiterate the creatine question.
Okay, so I think it looks like there aren't any burning questions. But if you do have any questions, you should feel free to email them to us or to bring them to South Africa. And we appreciate all of you participating in today's call. For some of you, I know it's late in the evening in Africa, so we appreciate you making the time to stay on and do this. And I think we have one question is PrEP can be taken without meals. So yes, it's a great question about whether PrEP should be taken with meals or without meals. And it's really a personal preference. Some people feel a little, nauseous when they take the pills without meals. So the recommendation is to take it with meals if you have that side effect, but there is no requirement for when PrEP should be taken. It can be taken at any time of day, before or after any meal. I hope that helps clarify that question. And so I think, we've covered the most important points around PrEP, and certainly we'll have a chance to dig a little bit deeper into this on day one at Johannesburg. But as you could see from the agenda, it's fairly a rich and expansive agenda where a lot of the discussions will rely on the expertise within the room. And therefore, we're really interested in hearing from you and learning from you and putting you in touch with each other so that you would learn from each other. And we hope that the training itself will help you bring to a place where you can do more around PrEP engagement in your countries.
Hello, Mohan.
So with that, I think we will close the webinar. So thank you once again for being with us today. Thank you for making the time, and good luck on your travels to South Africa, on the visas, on the tickets. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll see you in Johannesburg in a couple of weeks. Thank you.